Okay, guys, we're on a bit of a journey here, and I'm going to invite you to take your Bibles, if you will, and turn to Matthew 5. This has been the topic of our study for the last few weeks, and will continue to be for a few weeks to come. But it's a passage entitled the Beatitudes, and it's all about attitudes. It's the B attitude. This is the attitude that Jesus would want for you to have, and attitudes are not behaviors. Behaviors come out of attitudes. Jesus is not telling you to behave in a particular way. He's telling you what kind of attitude you need to have in order to behave the way that he would want for you to be. Simple truth. Let me read it to you again. I never tire of reading the Beatitudes every time I read it. And over the course of the last few weeks, I've read it hundreds of times. And every time, in the simplicity of what it is, it continues to speak. Verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And for those of you who were here on Sunday, I did say I'd do the second half, but it's in here now, so that's all about what it means to mourn. And then tonight, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jordan prayed for them just now, and that was really good to remember the persecuted church around the world. Just turn on the TV, and you will see how Christians are being incredibly persecuted. They would kill to be here amongst us tonight, but unfortunately they are being killed. So it's a tragic thing. But Jesus did tell us to expect it. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Tonight, we're into verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Everybody wants an inheritance, and Jesus promises it to the meek. Now, what I thought I would like to do tonight is similar to what I did last week on a Wednesday night, is I want to bring out some points, and then I'm just going to give you a biblical passage or a reference to a particular incident in somebody's life that I would encourage you to go home and to read, so that I don't have to spend the whole time, telling the issues at stake. Otherwise, it will take too much time. So your homework is to take down the point if you're writing it down, or if you want to get it off the internet or whatever, and then go home and read the passage. I'll just give you the basic gist of what happened, and then go home and read. The Bible is just the most amazing book, full of incredible stories. So I will give you the reference and trust you to do the rest. But our first challenge on the subject of meekness is to define what meekness really means. Now, there is a dictionary definition and there is a theological definition, and they are poles apart. I have referred to this before, and as I think about it again, it just so is counter. The biblical one is so opposite to the one that the world says. The definition in the dictionary says this: that meekness simply means tame, timid, mild, bland. What's this? Can't read my writing. Inoffensive. And I look at that and I think, yes. Moses, who was declared by himself to be of all people most meek, was anything but inoffensive. Moses was anything but tame or timid. To go and stand in the face of Pharaoh, this mighty man who could have in a flash taken his life. There was no timidity in this man. So the dictionary definition of this thing called meekness doesn't cut it. So we turn now to the biblical perspective of what this thing called meekness is. We often we speak of Jesus, gentle Jesus, what? Meek and mild, and I think of Jesus turning over the tables of those outside the temple because they were ripping off the people and the injustices that Jesus saw. And we know that Jesus was the perfect example of meekness, and yet he was not the little gentle, pathetic figure that people paint him out to be. There was something more to this meekness than meets the dictionary definition. Biblical definition speaks of two things. If you want to write this down, these are the two things I want to talk about tonight. Biblical meekness means power under control. Jesus had all power, but he had it completely under control. You will know your personal meekness when you understand that the arena in which you operate, where you exhibit power, if that power or authority is under control and you're not lording it over, you're not acting like bigger than anybody else, and you're not bullying people with the power that you have. If you're doing it properly, then you will understand power under control is a beautiful one definition of what this meekness is about. Power under control. It's kind of like a great horse that has been tamed, and you have this bring the stallion, and this thing is so powerful, but power out of control is destructive. Power out of control can get you into all sorts of trouble. And we see this amongst powerful, inverted commas, people. Power out of control can lead to a lot of crisis. So power under control. As Jesus hung upon the cross, there he was. All power in Jesus. The creator of the whole universe, of everything, hung upon a cross. And the angels were saying, Jesus, use your power. You can get out of here. Jesus, use your power. You can come down off the cross and we can wipe all these people out. Jesus, use your power. All power was given to God and Jesus. And here we see Jesus saying, I submit my power to the will of God. That, people, is a great picture of biblical meekness, certainly not weakness. The second aspect of this that we'll talk about tonight is power when things are out of control. So in power, the first aspect is power under control, and the second aspect is power when things are out of control in your life and you don't lose it and you keep your head. You will be evidencing meekness, as that's the result of the power that God has given. Now, a guy by the name of William Barclay is a theologian that many in our understanding of theology would look to for guidance. And he's pretty good. I don't think he's the perfect theologian, but he's profoundly accurate in many areas. And he says that meekness is one of the words in Scripture that is almost undefinable. Because to put a meaning to this word will kill it, will totally kill it. Meekness is around because you can see the evidence of it. You can't define it. You can't define it. But it exists because you can see its evidence. So as we look at these two aspects tonight, we'll have a look at this. But here's an interesting thought. Meekness is defined as a be attitude. Meekness is an attitude of spirit. It's something that happens below the waterline of your life and is found in your character. It is evidenced, however, in a thing called goodness. Now, I have my trusty board over here. And remember a while back we did a little exercise using the illustration of an iceberg. Remember this? And we said that only 20% of the iceberg is above the waterline. 80% of the iceberg is below the waterline. That's where the people in the Titanic went wrong. This is where your character lies. It's below the waterline of your life. This is the 20% that people can see. You will never see more than 20% of who I am. Even my wife will only see a little bit more than that, hopefully, because 80% of who I am is between me and God. Only I and God know what's going on in here and in here. I can fool you, baby. I can fool you with the top 20%. And I can make myself look a lot better than I actually am. And you will think, man, something good must be going on in his character. Do not be fooled. We can fool one another with this, but 80% is unseen. It's like the under the waterline, below the waterline of an iceberg. This is where meekness lives. Meekness is evidenced in the top 20% by another word that I think is important to you. Meekness is seen to be the attitude, but gentleness Gentleness is the evidence of meekness. Gentleness. Gentleness. Now, this is not the gentleness that people perceive it to be, which looks like wimpishness. It's not that at all. Not that at all. But there is a gentleness of spirit that you see in the life of Jesus, where Jesus could on the one hand be thrown over the tables in the temple and doing all sorts of robust, manly kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, Jesus is taking the kids onto his lap, and he's holding children, and he's embracing kids, and the gentleness of Jesus' character comes out. There's Jesus with his disciples, and he's teaching great things, and all of a sudden he sees a beautiful flower, and Jesus says, "Hey guys, check this flower." And as Jesus, "Us men, we're fishermen, we don't hang up flowers. We don't do flowers." Jesus says, "Check this flower. Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." And you see the beautiful of the gentleness of Jesus coming out, and the contrast between the two is absolutely there. And so when we look at the evidence of gentleness, it comes out of a heart or a character of meekness. It's the stuff that's going on below the waterline of your life. You must know, however, and I'm sure you've heard the cliche, that meekness is not weakness. Right on. Meekness is not weakness. There is a character in the Old Testament. This is one of the things that you can go and read. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and chapter 3 is the story of Eli. Eli was a priest, and he was in charge of everything that took place in the sacrificial system of the day. Eli, however, had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. And these two guys were reprobates, and they didn't obey their father, and he thought that he would just be nice and meek and mild and gentle, and his sons went completely off the rail. On one occasion, the priests in those days, an intriguing thing, that the priests were allowed to, when people brought their offerings in, they would put in certain offerings the meat into a big pot, and they would boil the meat. And the priest, because he never earned a salary, he was just dependent upon the sacrificial system to eat, he would take a three-pronged fork and he would plunge it into the pot of the boiling meat, and what came out of the pot was allowed by him to be eaten. God would give him, say, "You can eat that." But Hophni and Phinehas decided they didn't want to wait for it to get in the pot because they couldn't see what they were spearing. So they said, we want you to give this to us raw. We want to take the best piece, the one with all the fat, and we want to choose it before it goes into the pot. No, you would think, come on, that's a technicality. Well, I have to tell you people, God is into technicalities. God is into detail. They took the piece of meat before it got in the pot because they wanted the best piece, and God judged them. He says, "Hey, Eli, that's bad news. Your sons have committed a great sin." Then a little while later in the next chapter, they have a battle with the Philistines, and Hophni and Phinehas are killed by way of the judgment of God. So you don't want to mess with the technicalities. You don't want to change them because God has put them into place. But here's the lesson. Here we look at Eli and we think, man, here's this meek, gentle guy. Not at all. The guy was weak to the core, because meekness does not mean weakness. Meekness does not mean weakness. So you look at the example in chapter 4, those kids both lost their lives because of a weak father. Then you go on to have a look at this thing, power under control. Let's take this. This is the best way for it to be evidenced. I want to make a list for you here. Power under control. There are certain cries that meek people make as I read the Bible. I want to suggest a few of these things that come out of their lips at certain times in their lives, and it's the cry of the meek. This is the best way to define it because you can see it and you can say, man, that's a great attitude. Here's the first one. The cry, "You choose." You choose. Everybody wants their will, do they not? It's not a sign of meekness. When I have to have my way in anything, it's not meekness. That's the opposite of meekness. That's you trying to be tougher than you should be. But a meek person, in the context of personal preference, is always going to say, your way is better than mine. I'm happy that we do things your way. There's a rule that you can take and you can apply in your business, and we use this often in the church, and it avoids a lot of conflict. If you know what to fight over, you'll fight a good fight. The trouble is we fight bad fights. We fight fights over personal preferences. if you're going to fight, you need to fight over a principle. If you've got preferences and principles, preferences need to go by way of the majority. Democracy rules personal preference. For instance, in a group this big, if there was something to say, okay, where should we put these flowers? Should we put them on this side or on that side? I go, that's an issue of preference. I actually personally don't care where the heck you put them. They're beautiful anyway. So we would say to you, okay, how many of you want to put it over here? It's an issue of preference. Anybody got a principle to tell us that it should be on the right-hand side of the stage? Nobody's got a principle that suggests that at all. So now it comes down to a matter of personal preference. It's not worth a fight. It's not worth a fight over personal preference because that always is destructive. Sadly, I hear horror stories of churches that split over issues of personal preference. What color should we paint the kitchen? Where should we put the flowers? How far should we put the organ? What kind of music should we have? These are all issues of preference. Let me tell you, those are fights not worth having. The answer to that is applied to a democracy where the majority wins because they're just issues of preference. You're not going to die on that hill. That's a waste of time. But when it comes to a preference, different story altogether. We will die for, principle. We will die for certain principles and we will hold to them. So if you're going to have a fight in your business or in wherever you want to do, and there's an issue that comes out that looks like it's going to be antagonistic, ask yourself the question, is this a principle? If it's a principle, here's how you know it's a principle. You have to have a Bible verse to back your principle. If you haven't got a Bible verse to back your principle, it becomes a preference and the majority rule. This can keep you out of a lot of conflict and a lot of hassles in your homes, in your businesses, in the churches. Is this an issue of preference or is it an issue of principle? If it's a principle, I want to see a Bible verse that goes with your principle. Does it make sense? So you look at this, and you look at a guy like Abraham. Let me give you the reference here. Genesis chapter 13. You have the story of Abram and Lot. They were both wandering through the wilderness. They had many sheep. The shepherds began to fight with each other. And so Lot and Abram met, and they said, we have to split up. Abram said, you could go either to the wilderness, or you can take the valley down here. You choose. You see, Abram was a meek guy. Lot, however, was not. So he looked and he said, yo, the desert doesn't look all that appealing. Not a lot of grass. Hey, Uncle Abram, I'm going to take the river valley, and I'm going to take where all the water is. And Abram said, hey, man, you choose. I'll trust God wherever you don't want to go. So the issue here, the first cry of the meek is, hey, man, let's do things your way. You choose. That's meekness. The second cry is this. In the life of Joseph, we have this cry that says, you intended it for evil. But God, the big but God intended it for good. You've heard that before, huh? For good. Have a look at Job. Here's Job, who's done nothing wrong. He's declared by God to be righteous. And the circumstances in his life just fall apart, man. He loses his finance, his business. He loses his kids. He loses his health. He loses absolutely everything. In Genesis chapter 50, you have the story of Joseph. Great story here. And he says this, Joseph says this. At the end of his life, everybody comes and says, Joseph, how did you behave so well? His brothers, who he had now restored, he had forgiven them. And they said, Joseph, we're really confused. How can you forgive us after what we have done to you? We sold you as a slave in Egypt. And Joseph, with a smile on his face, says, you may have intended it for evil, but I've got to tell you, brothers, you don't need to worry about that because God intended this for good. Meek people have an understanding to see the occurrences in their lives as not accidents. They are divine interventions. No matter how good they are, no matter how bad they are, those are divine interventions of God. And when you're able to say in the face of sickness and illness, hey, God, man, that sickness has intended it for evil, but I can trust you because I know you have intended it for good. That, people, is a great sign of meekness. So go and have a look at Genesis 50, and you will read the story of Joseph there. Here's another one. That's number 1. Sorry, this is really confusing up here. Number 3, the cry of in his time. Ecclesiastes tells us that all things are made beautiful in God's time. We're so impatient. want things now. I want to have this. I want to build this church now. But hey, man, I have to relax in the knowledge that in His time, all things will be made beautiful. Great illustration, wonderful story over here is you'll find in 1 Samuel chapter 26. I love this story. It speaks of the humility of that man David. David is running from King Saul. He's not the king yet. Saul is still the king. And David is running in the hills, and Saul is after him. And one afternoon, it's really hot, and Saul goes and lies down. Evening comes, and David says to Abishai, one of his mighty men, "Come, let's go down into the camp." And they go down into the camp, and they find Saul in his tent. And it is it looked like a divine intervention, because Saul is lying fast asleep there. David has been anointed. He knows he's going to be the king. Here's Saul. He knows if I could kill Saul, if Saul were to die, I could become the king straight away. No delay, everything now in my time. So Abishai buys the lie, and he says to David, "Hey, David, God has delivered him into your hand. Take the spear and run him through. Kill him, man, and you'll be the king." Oh, man. And David says this. He says, no. Let's not do that. In God's time, He will make me the king without me having to lay a hand to the king of Israel. And I'm thinking, man, that's crazy stuff. I would have run Saul through, promise you, so I could become the king now. I knew that I was going to be the king, and I would have bought the lie to say, God has delivered him into your hands, because it so looked like that. But the cry of the meek is to say, in God's time, I will wait for that, because He makes everything beautiful in His time. That's a great cry of the meek. How about this one? This is a tough one. Father, forgive. Meek people are great forgivers. They really are. And I know that's a reference to Jesus on the cross. And everybody's railing at Him, mocking Him, laughing at Him, and saying, "If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross." And Jesus looks up to His Father in heaven and says, "Father, forgive them, man. They don't know what they are doing." But here's another story that illustrates that so beautifully. Go home and read Numbers chapter 12. And you will read a scary story. In those days when Moses was leading the children of Israel, there was Moses, there was Aaron, and there was Miriam. Aaron and Miriam were Moses' brother and sister. And they looked as they were leading the people, and God was using Moses, and everybody was listening to Moses, and Moses was the point of reference for everybody, what they were saying. And Aaron and Miriam looked at this and said, "Hey, how come he gets all the glory? How come this sucker is getting all the credit? We deserve a little bit of credit as well. After all, we're his brother and sister, and God uses us as much as He uses him." That wasn't true anyway. But they became jealous of Moses. One day God could take it no longer, and a cloud from heaven came down and settled over them. And God spoke to Aaron and Miriam and told them He was very unhappy with them, that they had gone against God's anointed. The cloud lifted, and Aaron and Miriam had leprosy. And Moses cried out and said, "God, please heal her." What he was really saying, "God, forgive her." And everybody's saying, "Man, she's gone against you." Moses is saying, No. Come, Miriam. Come back into the fold. Come back again, Miriam. And he prayed that God would forgive this woman who had gone in his face, had been a pain in the butt the entire time, had nagged him to death. And he says, "Lord, forgive her. And could you just heal her as well?" That, people, is a sign of incredible meekness. Meek people are great forgivers. Let me give you one more in this category. Number 5, the cry, "Your will be done." I've said this to you before, that the intonation is important here. You know what intonation means? Your tone of voice. How you say "your will be done," the tone of voice will determine what your heart is really saying. There are 3 ways to say this. The first way to say is, "Okay, your will be done." You know, it's like this thing of this horrible feeling of active rebellion. "Your will be done." And it's like waving your fist in God's face, saying, "You're bigger than me. Okay, your will be done." And that's the one way of saying it. There is, however, another way, the passive resignation phase. You remember that? Where we say, Okay, all right. Well, I suppose I didn't win that one. Okay, your will be done. And we say it with a passive resignation or an active rebellion. There's another way, however, that Jesus advocates is the way of the meek, where they say with a positive relaxation. So you've got positive aggression, you've got active rebellion, you've got passive resignation, and then you've got a positive relaxation to say, Lord, you know the best. You know what's best for me. Lord, your will be done. And you see this in the Lord's Prayer, your will be done. You see it with Jesus, and the reference here that you can go and read is found in Matthew chapter 26 of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane at the toughest time of his human life. And he's sweating drops of blood, and he's saying, God, is there not maybe plan B? Is there not just another way that maybe I don't have to go to the cross? And then suddenly he comes to the realization that for this reason I have come. And he says, Lord, Father, cancel that prayer. Your will be done. Positive relaxation. So these are the 5 cries of the meek. How you say these will determine in many ways the meekness of your personality and where you're at. You choose your way, preference versus principle. But God intended it for good. Instead, you intended it for evil. But God says that's good for me. In His time, let me just relax. In His time, He'll do this thing. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then lastly, your will be done. Have you got it? Okay, that's that one. Power under control. Let's talk very quickly about this. Power when things are out of control. And that happens in our lives sometimes. And I have just 3 cries for you at this particular point. Here they are. When things are out of your control, what do you say? The first one is this. I love this. This is one of my favorites. Let God be God. Right on. Let God be God. I'm not God. Let God be God. This is the cry we mentioned just now of Job. Lost everything. Everything. And everybody's saying, Job, you must have sinned. And he says, no, I haven't. They said, Job, something must be terrible. He says, man, just let God be God. The Lord is given, the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. How do you say that? In the face of burying your children, in the face of losing your entire business. And he says, guys, don't antagonize me. Do not offend God. Just let God be God. That's the cry of the meek. When things are out of control, this guy had power over his self-pity. There's power here. And he had power. Self-pity will lead you to an awful, awful place. But he had power over his own self-pity. The second cry in this category is the power of, I love this too, be of good what? Cheer. Well done, whoever said that. Be of good cheer. Be of good cheer. There are many times. Jesus said this once, but Paul said this in the most incredible time when the circumstances were dire. The ship was about to be sunk. They'd been in the storm for weeks, and the raging storm had been there. The centurions had tried to get off the ship and just leave the prisoners on there, and Paul was one of the prisoners on the ship. And he gets up in the midst of all of the storm, and it's raging, and it looks like it's darkness, and it's despair, and it's hopelessness. And Paul, with a smile on his face, amidst all of that stuff, says, hey guys, be of good cheer. That's not a popular message. I bet the guys were wanting to throw him overboard. You know, who's this positive Polly amongst us here at a time when things are looking this bad? But he says, be of good cheer. None one of you will lose your lives. And when that ship went down and they swam for the shore, 276 people, the entire crew and all the soldiers were saved that day. And Paul had the intonation, just the beauty of the power within him to say, no matter how bad the storm is, no matter how bad it is, be of good cheer. That's meekness. That's power over your circumstances. This first power is the power over self-pity. The second power is the power over dire circumstances. Let God be God. Be of good cheer. It's going to be fine. The last one in this is, it is finished. Finished. It is finished. I've been a Christian since I was about 12, 13 years old. And I have seen people come into the Christian life, and I've seen them go. It's a tragic thing. It seems so sad that somebody will come, and I have baptized people, almost to my embarrassment, who have said, I will never turn back. I will follow Jesus for the rest of my life. And I'm saying as we baptize them, according at your own request and with this purpose that you've established in your mind, I baptize you now. And within 6 months, the guy's not walking with Jesus anymore. And I look at this and I say, what happened here? How come he didn't finish the race? How come he didn't finish it? He started and he never finished it. And I would predict, here's a horrible prediction, that in a congregation this size, I would guarantee that probably within 6 months, 20% of you won't be walking with the Lord anymore. That's the statistic that there is out there. That at any one time, 20% of a congregation will within 6 months walk out of the doors of the church either offended or hurt or something like that into an oblivious Christian life that you cannot live on your own, and they do not finish the race that God has called them to. That, people, is absolutely tragic. I cannot tell you how many people have said, I promise I will follow Jesus for the rest of my life. And I'm thinking, wow, that's so cool. 6 months later, there's cricket on a Sunday morning. The guy thinks, well, listen, I'd rather watch cricket than go to church, or I'd rather do this than the next thing. And I'm knocking you guys, but because I'd like to watch cricket too. But, I don't know. And I just see people finishing half a race. And it's not how you start the race, it's how you finish it that's important. That's why Paul said, at the end, I have finished the race. Oh man, I hope you finish yours, because I can't finish it for you. But I do know that you don't finish it in advance. You finish it one day at a time. Can I finish with this? When you say it is finished, you're saying, I will finish this race, and at the end of my life, and I have had the privilege of sitting at the bedside of some of the great saints of this church, when I've watched them finish well. And I'm thinking, man, I want to finish well. I don't know about you. If you're going to finish well, there's certain things you've got to do, and there's certain things you've got to not do. You're not going to fall into some stupid sin, because that means you won't finish well. If you're going to finish well, you've got to guard your attitude, you've got to guard your relationships, you've got to do this thing, and you've got to do it well. You better get a vision for your own life, because nobody can find a vision for you. And you've got to finish that ministry. So many of us are so busy looking at each other that we forget that I'm going to be accountable for my life. I cannot stand before God one day and blame somebody for me not finishing my race, no matter how bad it's been. Some people think that my husband or my wife is there to make me happy. No, they're not. Jesus is there to make you happy. And your relationship with him is absolutely critical, and you will not be judged upon the success or failure of another relationship. You will be judged upon the success or the failure of the relationship that you have with Jesus. And you better finish that one really well. If you finish that one well, the chances are you'll finish the other relationships well as well. So get this point. It's got to be finished, and I would love for us to be finished well. One last thing. I think I said that just now. Okay. Okay, we have 5 minutes. Okay. How do you become meek? How does meekness happen? Is it just that we have certain people with meeker personalities? Let me tell you how meekness happens, and I'll be like a wild horse. Some people need to be tamed to become meek and be able to use their power and their strength in the right way. A great horse is without meekness and without training and being broken in is just a means of destruction and chaos. So God has to do the same thing with us. And he does this by tough experiences. God takes us through tough experiences so that he can knock a few of the rough edges off us so that we can become and learn to become meek. That life is not all about us. It's not all about me being fulfilled. It's not all about you fulfilling my needs. It's about me meeting Jesus, and sometimes tough experiences is part of the deal. Sometimes Jesus has to discipline us. And that's part of the meekness. That's part of us being broken in so that the power that God gives us can be used well and not used in a dysfunctional manner. He has to sometimes break us in. And so we become meek through a thing that we don't like called brokenness. Has brokenness got 2 ends? 1. You sure? Okay. All right, brokenness. Moses in the wilderness. He came into the wilderness far too strong. And God said, Moses, you are too strong for me to use. After 40 years under Pharaoh's rule, with the best education, the best training, you are just too strong. Moses, I need to break you before I can make you. Now, therein lies a military principle. If any of you guys have ever been in the military, you'll understand the principle. When you arrive at that base camp and you think, hey, I am so tough at Charlie, you know, that you are so blessed, Army, to have me, and some big hairy-backed sergeant major says you're a useless plebe, and you're like a stuffed lettuce, you know, and tells you you're absolutely useless, you know, and he breaks you. And the reason he breaks you is so that he can make you. And as it's true in the military, I promise you, it's true in our Christian lives, that brokenness leads to effectiveness. Some of us are just too strong. Some of us are just too tough. And God says, you're like Moses. Take 40 years in the wilderness. Take that. And let's break you before we can make you. So brokenness is one way that meekness happens to happen. The other thing is beautiful, is through mentoring. When you walk, or you have somebody walk alongside you through life, like Jesus did with his disciples, and they looked at Jesus, these rough, tough fishermen, and they were mentored by Jesus. Everybody needs a mentor, and I believe that everybody should be a mentor to somebody. I think that's a brilliant principle. You need to find somebody who will walk through life, somebody who epitomizes what you want to become. And when you're mentored by somebody like that, their way of life begins to rub off on you. I had the privilege of having people like Arne Bradeseth and Nelson and other people who were just the most incredible mentors to me as a young pastor in this church 20 years ago. I owe them big time, man, as they walked alongside us, younger guys. And they spoke gently with conviction into our lives. They taught us what it meant to be the difference between a preference and a principle. They picked us up when we fell or we made mess-ups. And you know, I used to give Uncle Nels a thing where I would ask him to crit my sermons because I was learning how to preach. And I was never preached until I came to this church 20 years ago. And I gave him this thing. Man, he was brutal with me, man. And he would fill this thing and he says, you keep standing with your hands in your pockets. You know, it was mentoring. Yeah, I cannot, okay. You know, and you must, he picked up all the little idiosyncrasies that I had, and he took it seriously, man, and I owe him a huge debt of gratitude. Some of the things that I learned from Honor and some of the other great men of God, you cannot learn those things out of a book. You've got to have somebody who speaks into your life who does that for you. So I suggest you find somebody who does that. Mentoring is powerful. And then the last thing is, please, your heart needs to be broken when you realize the value, man, of people. Meek people understand the value of a human being. They understand the value of somebody, even though that person has nothing to offer them, just simply because they are human beings. Have a look. Last example at Peter, Acts chapter 10. Go and read this one. Peter is a proud Jewish boy, the fisherman, the one who walked on the water, the one who Jesus restored. And one day, a Roman centurion was told to go and tell Peter to come and preach the gospel where he was. Now, Peter was a Jewish man. He didn't have any time for Gentiles, especially Romans. He hated Romans. He despised Romans. And he would have nothing, even as a good Christian now, with the Roman people. One afternoon, 3 times, God gives him a vision. And in this vision, as it's hot and he's lying on the top of his house, he sees the vision of this sheet coming down. And he looks into the sheet and he's hungry. And he sees all these supposedly unclean animals and reptiles in there. And he says, God, I can't eat these things. They're unclean. He has the same vision 3 times. And then eventually God says, Peter, do not declare anything that I have made to be unclean. Just then there's a knock on the door and Cornelius the Roman is there, saying, Peter, can you come and help us? Peter's life and his heart was broken when he understood the value of a human being, even if he was a Roman. That's meekness. When you understand the value of people, when you learn how the power of a mentor in your life, and you understand that God has to break you before he can make you. Let's pray. Lord, the subject of meekness man, it's a big one. We thank you that there is a promise associated with meekness, and that is that the meek will inherit the earth. Lord, I know that being made meek by you is not always a comfortable experience. It involves being broken and then being put back together again so that you can use us. It means finding you at the point of tough experiences and discipline in our lives. Thank you for the power of great people in our lives, for the power of great mentors who draw alongside us. And it's not what they say that speaks to us, it's who they are that makes an impression in our lives. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap, but when people live that stuff out, man, what a difference that is to us. Father, I pray that we will learn what it means to realize the value of human beings, that we would do our pride in, because pride is offensive to the meek. Lord, I pray as we look at these different cries tonight, that you would help us to understand the merit that there is in them. The cry of you choose. Maybe there are people here tonight, I don't know, who are in conflict. I don't know. Maybe at work or wherever. And you want your own way. I want it my way. It's just a preference. And a meek person is going to say, hey man, it's just an issue of preference. Let's do it your way. Wow, that's meekness. There's power in that. There are others who have had mean things happen to them, and they're able to see through spiritual eyes that even if man has intended it for evil, God has intended it for good. Meek people understand that. There's a sense of meekness when we understand in your time, oh Lord, not my time, because I'm always in a hurry and I want things instantly. I want it now. But a meek person is willing to say, Lord, I'm willing to wait for you. In your time, may this thing happen as you see fit. God, as there's people that need to learn to forgive one another, meek people are good forgivers. They're always giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's a sign of meekness. They're not legalistic. They want the best for the other person. They will die for principles. Jesus did that. Hey, but things that don't really matter, they don't really matter. Lord, I pray tonight that we would understand what it means to tell you, your will be done with positive relaxation. We don't want to fight with you. We don't want to just submit to you because you're bigger than us. We really want to see that your will be done is always the best cry that comes from our lips. Lord, I pray as we leave from here tonight that this week and the rest of the week would be concentrating on these things, because we know as much as we need your Holy Spirit's power within us to do these things, your Holy Spirit needs us to cooperate with him. It's not one or the other, it's both. And I pray that we would cooperate well to become the meek people that will one day in the millennium will inherit the earth, that we will rule with you on this planet. And that's another sermon. Go with us now, Lord, we pray, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.